The MMORPG genre has millions of players across multiple games, from major studio releases to the more niche markets. And yet, as a genre, it has relatively few content creators. There are a handful of general MMO channels covering the genre as a whole, several video essay channels who touch on MMOs from time to time, and then specialized channels who focus on a specific game. But when you compare the MMORPG content creator roster to larger genres like first-person shooters or battle royales, even individual games like Minecraft or League of Legends, we are relatively small. The truth is, I want more people to start making MMO content, but there are some harsh truths you should know before starting. So why aren't there more general MMO content creators? Why aren't new up-and-coming YouTubers flooding into this market? And what's affecting the quality and quantity of the content that the current content creators can put out? Let's find out. Welcome, I'm Josh Strife-Hayes, and in this video I'm going to pull back the curtain on MMORPG content creation full expose style. I'll be talking to several other MMO content creators about their process and the challenges they face. If you've ever watched any MMO content creator, either general genre focused or game specific, and thought, why do all these guys suck? We need better creators. Then this video is for you, because put simply, we want more people to make MMO content, but we also need to be honest with you about what you're getting yourself into. This isn't me complaining about my job. I think I have the best job in the world, and I'm privileged to be able to create content on a genre I love so much. This video is simply a look at the reality of the challenges you will face creating content within the MMO arena. For this video, I reached out to and interviewed several other YouTubers who cover general MMO content, several who specialize in one specific MMO game, and several general entertainment channels whose work includes MMOs. These channels include Asmongold, Kira TV, The Lazy Peon, MMO Byte, Work to Game, Ginger Prime, Callum Upton, Zeppler, Brozeme, Wicked Wiz, Many Kudos, Rage Darling, The Mighty Teapot, and Nerd Slayer. I sat down and spoke to each of these creators at length about 7 specific issues I feel MMO content creators face. 1. The actual audience size of the MMO market in relation to the general gaming world. 2. The toxic response of extreme fans to critique of their game. 3. The risks of being a general genre channel versus specializing into a single game. 4. The sheer amount of time it takes to finish an MMORPG. 5. The time-sensitive nature of MMOs pushing creators to make repetitive videos or focus on speed over depth. 6. The viability of first impression videos and why the genre is strange in its celebrated design trope of endgame. And 7. The difference in playing to critique and playing to enjoy. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to include the complete interview with every creator, because doing that would make this video over 7 hours long, so I've had to edit them down to succinct answers. No one has been edited to appear out of context or to provide a false narrative away from their true feelings. The Lazy Peon was unable to talk via audio, but he did provide a complete list of answers to me, so those will be read in. Because of the need to be thorough and give each creator time to explain their position, this needed to be a long video, so grab a drink and settle in as we discuss the truth behind MMO content creators. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who help keep this channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. The first issue is the total size of the audience actually consuming MMO content. Let's start simple. Why don't the mainstream gaming news have detailed coverage on MMORPGs? While you might get the occasional review on Final Fantasy XIV and its massive multi-million-pound expansions, or the cinematic trailers for The Elder Scrolls Online, you won't find PC Gamer discussing the monthly RuneScape patch notes, or print newspaper articles about the nerfs and buffs of Neverwinter. As an MMO fan, it can be important to step back and realise while the genre has passionate fans, the average person may not even know what the acronym MMO means. Games like Call of Duty, Candy Crush, and FIFA simply appeal to far more people. If gaming magazines were still the primary form of distributing gaming news, the editor would have to make a decision about what news deserves front page space, or even major article space within the magazine, and the MMO genre would never be the first choice. Now, print media is dying, but the principle remains the same with digital. Front page space is still limited on a website. While a gaming news site may be able to host an article about MMOs, it just won't get as many views as an article about, say, Apex Legends or Minecraft. This means reporting on MMOs is often too niche for major news sites, so you have the more focused sites like MMO Bomb or Massively OP. While these sites do a great job of reporting on the MMO world, they don't have the funding of the major sites. What this means is, while individual creators can find levels of success, there's far less fame and fortune in MMO content than in other genres. MMO videos are often produced by individuals, not teams, and this impacts both the quality and quantity of content. The individuals need to play the games themselves, record the footage, write the scripts, record the voiceover, edit it, and then upload it, and all this takes time. Now, large corporations can crank out endless daily content with extremely high production values about popular games because they know those videos will be consumed by the gaming masses. While there are standout creators who have been able to produce high quality content like Settled with his old school RuneScape series, those videos take weeks, sometimes months to create. And a career on YouTube needs you to make consistent, high-quality videos. The MMO content creation landscape is simply much smaller scale than many realise.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the same with anything. It's basically like concentric circles that become smaller the more that you get into it. And I use this analogy whenever I was talking about pay to win in games. It's that, you know, you have like the circle of people that play the game, the circle of people that consume content for the game, the circle of people who consume content for the game that they play, that care about this topic, and then inside of that are the people that are actually willing to do something about it. So whenever you actually get down into it, I think that's very much the case. And the MMOs, I think, are a very interesting type of genre, because a lot of people that play MMOs are, I think, a little bit more like nostalgic for how things were versus like maybe shooters or RPG games as a whole. And because of that, I think that you see a lot more of an aversion towards like the social media, phenomenon, and like the YouTube videos and content creators. And I've seen more pushback towards content creators in MMOs than I have in a bunch of other content, and a bunch of other types of types of genres of games.
You will sometimes run into people that play the game or have played the game, but it's not so big that it's all encompassing. Everyone's heard about this, and I feel like generally, especially even for like very experienced Warframe players, people are pretty comfortable with that. Warframe is a game that is kind of one of the ones it's big, but nobody talks about it.
Yeah, I think it's massively overestimated, the size, and for one key reason. The players play multiple MMOs, but they only really have one MMO that they call home. Whenever we see like new MMOs coming out, you see existing like player bases just moving from MMO to MMO. And I think it's unfair to look at the population size from like a net total of all popular MMOs, because most people are jumping from one to the next. And I think that's the main factor, for me at least, in thinking that the audience isn't as big as we think. Because like you say, it's an even smaller audience that watch the content. But that's a more true audience because it's one YouTube account, you know, to watch all the MMO content. And I think that's why we see a much smaller sample size in content creation.
The idea that within just the label of MMORPG that there is actually any idea of a community. I think the term MMORPG community is in and of itself an oxymoron. It's not to insult people who love MMORPGs, but you can just go out to any the main subreddit, but any space. MMOs are, like, I think almost in a way tribal by nature and by business model. But within that space, then you could talk about within people who enjoy the content, like not just play the games, but enjoy the content, people who then go about and share their opinion in a comment or a tweet or even post on the Reddit or even the fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And so MMORPGs are very niche.
In general, whenever you're doing anything, you're basically niche within a niche, and you're talking about fractions of percentages of player bases. It's definitely much smaller than what people would think from the actual player numbers.
I think the Twitch viewer numbers whenever a new MMO has released has shown there are a lot of people interested in MMOs waiting for the next big thing. New World plus Lost Ark are examples. 1 million players at launch, close to 1 million Twitch viewers. The interest is there, however the next-gen quality MMO that people are waiting for isn't.
The Hive leader, who used to do MMO-oriented videos, and then he left to pursue more comic-related, more generalized gaming videos because he knew that the MMO scene was continuing to stagnate. And my hairdresser that I go to every month, she has friends that have children. They're all gamers. They play things like Fortnite, like PUBG. He's pursuing content creation himself. He has a channel that's got, I think, like 20 or 30,000 views. So she asked me, "Hey Mark, what kind of advice do you have for him?" And I'm like, "Well, what kind of videos does he do? Because I do MMO related content." And then asked her to clarify with me what exactly an MMO is. So then I said it's a massively multiplayer game, and he goes, "Oh, so it's like Fortnite."
We live in a bubble. It feels like everything is so massive and big to us and popular, especially when we get a new game now. It's like, even if it's not a AAA game, we're just like, wow, look at this new game. Like, it's like, but when you look at a lot of our barriers, which I think are just some of them natural, right? Progression takes time, some more time investment. You look at the difficulties of the games, in many cases have been too hard to even attract the right kind of audience, and having a stable internet connection, and in some cases being willing to pay the subscription fee has been things that have been huge barriers that have kept the audience smaller. And feels like that content is big because our influence is big, right? We influence every other genre. Every other genre wants to be like us in some ways, but I don't think we actually move the needle, which is kind of what you're saying, as much as people might think.
If you were talking to like a mum and you were like, hey, I play an MMORPG, they'd be like, what's that? Is that like Fortnite? Because the concept of an MMO is massively multiplayer online. So it gives that false perception that there are so many people to populate, but in reality, it really isn't. I think there's a small amount of gamers that play MMORPGs regularly. It's interesting that 50 to 70,000 seems like a lot of people, because it actually isn't. I think there's like 8 million people playing Fortnite right now, and that's a lot of people.
Even just talking to a friend, his idea of an MMO came from, what was that show? Big Bang Theory. And I mean, I've not really watched much of it, but I can already tell that it's probably toned down quite a lot. It's probably a lot harder for the general audience to understand what an MMO is, and then to describe that in a very simplistic way. I can see that being a challenge in of itself, because I don't really see MMOs being talked about too much, to be honest, besides YouTube.
If you have 5, 6, 7 friends, an MMO can feel very lively. It can feel, that's not 12 million. Like, we're talking 6, like could fit in a large SUV. Like it's that's what it takes. And some of these games call for 25. Like, they don't take this big thing. But there's so many ways to play, and there's such big games that you end up honed in with your little group of like 8 or so. And that ends up defining your experience. Somebody can have a bad guild experience and can quit an MMO, even though that was really based on probably 2 or 3 out of like 20 people that put the bad taste in their mouth. So I think not only are they not that big, but they don't have to be that big.
I think in recent years that has started to shift a little bit. I think I felt like that more longer ago than maybe in the past couple of years, because I mean, recently we've seen a lot of hype and a lot of publicity around Lost Ark, New World. Like last year, there was a massive media frenzy about the WoW Exodus. I don't know, maybe my perspective is distorted because I'm in this community, and so when I see a lot of news about FF14, I'm like, oh well, everybody is clearly talking about FF14. My game is big and getting bigger, but that. I'm not sure if I can give an honest answer to that while I'm so entrenched within this bubble, right? Like, can I be really objective about that when I can't? I'm knee deep in it.
So the people and few organisations who are making MMO content are often much smaller, but now let's look at who we're making content for. And I'd like to focus on the general MMO content style, overviews of many games, and not specialising into a single game yet. An MMO is designed to be played for many hundreds or thousands of hours. They are multi-year long experiences, and because of this, it's difficult to fully commit to multiple. If you're playing World of Warcraft for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're not going to be able to find the time to also play 8 hours of the Elder Scrolls Online every day, and Guild Wars 2 and RuneScape. This means the most hardcore players of any MMO are often committed to that one game. While they may dabble in others, they do not know it to the extent of their main game. They know every aspect of that game. They are, in effect, an authority on that game. The real danger with extreme fans is when that game becomes more than a game to them. It becomes a character trait, a lifestyle, or in extreme cases, a lifeline. MMOs are designed to be able to exploit addictive personalities, and in some cases, players with antisocial personalities or social issues in real life will retreat into the MMO world, and the MMO world can become more real to them than reality, meaning any critique or review of their MMO is seen as a personal attack attack against them. Now, all hobbies have the toxic extremists within them, but the MMO genre is uniquely designed to be played for thousands of hours and to give you a second reality to immerse yourself in. While hobbies such as painting or running or cooking can be immersive and people can certainly build personalities around them, they don't encourage or facilitate the creation of a totally separate reality in the way MMOs do. This can lead to hardcore players becoming so deeply isolated within their game's subculture that it can begin to feel like the game is the biggest thing in the world. Everyone they know plays it. Everyone they know likes it. Existing within that social bubble of an MMO game can slowly warp a player's perception of how important that game is, or status within that game is, to everyone else. And then a reviewer or content creator comes along and makes a video on that game. Unless that reviewer is one of the hardcore fans themselves and already has thousands of hours in that game, the fans will look at the review and ask, what gives you the authority to review my game? Hardcore fans will want to be represented and critiqued by someone just as experienced and committed as them, and while that's totally understandable from a gaming content perspective, it can mean any review from a reviewer with fewer hours invested than the hardcore player base gets immediately discarded. Hobbies are of course important, and a variety of hobbies allows you to experience a variety of things in your life, but a hobby should always enhance your life and not become it or trap it. Extended time inside a virtual world can sometimes blur the lines between virtual and reality. I'm not saying you shouldn't be proud of the achievements you have within games, but you shouldn't confuse them with meaningful life progression outside of the game. When an MMO game becomes someone's main source of socializing or of personal pride through virtual achievements, reviews, especially negative ones, can be met with extreme, abusive, or in some cases dangerous backlash.
I think I've been dealing with that for the last 5 years, probably longer than that. I think it's just the case is because it's, again, like it's what you said, whenever you attack the game, you attack their identity, because so much of their identity is tied up with the game that whenever you say that this game is bad, well, whenever you've invested 10,000 hours into a game, but then somebody tells you that it's bad, you start getting a little bit of effectively buyer's remorse. What did I spend 10,000 of my hours for? What did I spend my life on the past 10 years if it's bad? You can't tell me that I wasted all my time on something that's bad. So I think people do take it very personally. I think that also content creators, there are just some nuances to making content with like MMOs that are more unique than that would be for other genres. So like, for example, people gift you items and people are able to like help you get certain things. And I think that does create a certain amount of animosity with people that want to use MMOs and video games as a whole, is that video games used to be that great equalizer for a lot of people who didn't necessarily have a lot of opportunities to maybe be successful in real life or do something, that's noteworthy in real life. They could go to a video game and be put on an even playing field with somebody who made $1 million a year or somebody who was 6'8" or something like that.
The big issue with the hyper enfranchised players, and I was this at one point. I mean, I've been covering Warframe for honestly a large part of it. I was out of touch with the usual player, and I feel like that's where most people will get to whenever you have spent enough time in a game that you kind of don't remember learning how to play it, and you spend a lot of time around these friend groups, like you said, that are also in the game and very experienced. You can begin to see yourself as being the average player when in most cases, if you're a long-term member of a community that is spending, multiple days a week on a game, you are not the average player of that game. And the other side of that, which is the much more unreasonable and very toxic, which is that you will begin to view yourself as the player that matters most, where your feedback is the one that's important. It's the one that the devs should pay attention to. The new content should be for you.
An MMO becomes your second life. This is where you want to spend all your time. And with MMOs just shifting and dying constantly, it's like this big cycle of just churning through the next MMO. People don't want their MMO that they've found as a home to die, and that they almost like protect it like a child. And it leads to, like you've said this before, tribalism, where your opinion may be completely valid, but they don't want it to be valid. If there are big flaws in a game like New World, which there were, we both exposed humongous flaws with that game, the community will rally and try and, pull it under their wing and protect it and say, yeah, but it's early days, where we're actually advocating for them to get a better version of the game that they bought, the version that they were promised. But they don't see it that way. They see it as us, slowly knocking the nail into the coffin.
Have I felt the sting from the MMO community? Well, yeah, not maybe just their identity, but it's their community. The perception that you might be preventing others from checking out their game, there's a risk. It's this weird gatekeeping mentality where you're going to say what we want you to say within this, here's the approved space. And we're also not going to we're not going to talk about it in this way because we don't want these type of players, coming into our space. I want, and I believe that honesty and authenticity within content is more important than somebody's feelings about a game.
I'm not sure I'd say that it's drastically more. I think maybe percentages. I think once you get into the hardcores, then probably, and there probably are more hardcores in MMOs just because of the time investment. But yeah, I think it's probably worse than other games in general. I would just say, just do whatever makes you happy and then just don't read the comments.
There were death threats a few years ago when I made a negative video about Final Fantasy XIV. The video was awful, to be fair, but still.
So gaming was an outlet for me. I made a lot of friends in them. I ended up preferring that to the life that I was living. So I can understand how these people are going from their life. They might work a 9-to-5 job that they hate. They come home and they get into this game where there's someone powerful. The kind of scene that we paint is different to the grand image that they have of the game. So I can understand how they feel that we're personally attacking a major part of their life with regards to how that's going to potentially affect new content creators. If your views don't necessarily align with the vocal majority, then they are going to crucify you. It doesn't matter what you say, what kind of defense that you have, they will hate on you and attack your views and your opinions regardless.
So I feel like you and I both probably have a similar answer in the sense that we probably have a lot of experiences with this sort of thing. So I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can because unfortunately we both have series that basically, even just by reading the name, can make you mad. Negative experiences that come to mind for me specifically have to be Final Fantasy XIV fans in almost any capacity. They mean well, but sometimes by meaning well, they do so much harm. And I think that that's obviously something we're probably talking about here in a sense, is the hyper enfranchised fans can actually make their game a lot less accessible. So I'll say Final Fantasy XIV fans were an example of that. And also I find it a lot in roleplay centric games, like SWTOR, for example. It's a very roleplay centric game. So for role players, they're looking and trying to play the game in a completely different way. So they don't care about a lot of the same concerns that I might have, or you might have, or someone else might have, right? Who's playing it for more than just roleplay.
I've got quite a unique position, I think, creating content with World of Warcraft, because the overall perspective of WoW is quite negative. Hyper enfranchised fans actually not liking the game. And so when I do say something positive about the game, because the game is actually really good in certain elements, they don't like that. If you think something else is good or something else is bad, your opinion is invalidated. If your opinion doesn't follow the cult group opinion of the game, you're alienated. And it almost feels like you're causing trouble by speaking your mind. It's kind of like going against the grain. And if you go against what they are already thinking, then it doesn't matter what you say. Your opinion's invalidated. It doesn't mean anything because it's not what they already think of the game.
Yeah, this is an absolute classic one. This is a topic I actually really like to talk about on stream. I try and push back against it as much as I possibly can because I think it's ultimately incredibly self-destructive, actually, to MMO communities. Like when you look at, if you look at a game and you go, wait, these guys are like a cult, or you go like, wait, do I really want to play? Do I want to get into this? It's a little bit weird, right? And for sure, I definitely think this happens with MMOs a fair bit, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's because it's such a big part of your identity, right? A big part of your life. You're like, wait, have I wasted my time? Did I pick the wrong game? What am I doing, right? This is not, this isn't right. This can't be right. This is my game. I play this game. So, or if you are going to be very critical of the game, it's not going to be interpreted in good faith, and that's that's putting it politely.
My latest upload on Starbase, right? And it's a self-proclaimed MMO, right? They say that it's an MMO, make your own fun kind of thing. Player-based economy. It's all about the players. Now, the game was already kind of dead. I mean, it's on life support, okay? So with about, let's say, 200 players max, even then, I was terrified because the amount of hours you would need and the amount of hours you see on some reviews, you know, coming up to nearly thousands of hours, you look at that and you think to yourself, well, I'm coming in, I want to tell a story. I also don't have thousands of hours to make this video. I don't want to risk just looking at links online and trying to put two and two together and missing something else that's hidden that everyone's going to call me out on. Why don't I just speak to the community? Almost kind of turn into, well, yes, this game has gone downhill, but there is a really good community behind it.
Is I think we get really tribalistic because we've allowed this hobby to become maybe more of our life than it should be. Escapism on its own is healthy. I think it's nice to be able to get out of your own skin from time to time, and every hobby does it. But I think when you let it get to the point that you need to like physically threaten or attack somebody, I don't know where the line is, but you're way past it.
MMOs are unique in that they do tend to encourage that human nature that tends to want to join a tribe and protect the tribe and be part of the tribe because they're so community driven, because they're so social. That's the thing that really makes MMOs unique. And it is a double-edged sword for sure. There are people who do make the MMO that they're playing their whole identity, their whole personality revolves around that. And so recently we've seen some problems with that. But there is definitely a subset of MMO players that treat it like it's us versus them. It is our tribe against the other tribe, which is bizarre and unsettling because they forget, this is a product.
If you do decide to create content within the MMO world, either on YouTube or Twitch, you've got two basic channel types. There are variations between these, but broadly, you'll either be general genre focused or specific game focused. General creators are able to give a broad overview of the genre at the expense of specialist knowledge within each game. These are creators like myself, The Lazy Peon, or Kira TV. We're able to paint with a broad brush, but this can mean missing the finer details. So instead of being a general MMO creator, you could specialise into a single game. It's absolutely possible to do. Many people have found YouTube and Twitch success as champions of their chosen game. Zeppler plays Final Fantasy XIV, The Mighty Teapot plays Guild Wars 2, Brozine plays Warframe, and each of them have lots of detailed content around that specific game, but even specialising is not without risks. The benefits of specialising are the community come to see you as an authority, and you're always able to make very specific, nuanced content. You're able to fully explore the depths of a game's systems that a general creator will miss or not have the time to explore. But the risks are how you are connecting your YouTube or your Twitch or even yourself as a level of celebrity to this game specifically. You're binding your career to it. And if the game fails, so do you. The larger specialized channels we have now are very talented, and they also happen to choose the correct games to bind themselves to find success. If WildStar had just released and you went all in on being a WildStar content creator, you're going to be pretty unhappy when the game shuts down and your YouTube back catalogue is now irrelevant. Or the Twitch streams you've been relying on for income suddenly see a massive drop in viewership because the game people know you for is gone, and people valued the game more than you. Specialising into a single game as a full-time creator is only an advantage if the audience who cares about your specialist knowledge is large enough to sustain you. Every time a new MMO comes out, we see waves of people decide this is the one. They specialise and they build careers up around Terra, or Elion, or Neverwinter, or more recently, New World. And if the game flops, so do they. Now, New World is still going, but the creators are not seeing anywhere near the amount of views they were when the game first released. General MMO content creators know this, and have to make a decision on general versus specialist. For example, while I'll happily make a silly video on, say, Swords of Legend Online, I won't pour thousands of hours into it to become a specialist before I do, because I simply do not think that would be a smart use of my time. I am aware this means my content will sometimes miss the more esoteric details of a game, and anger the player base for it, but that's a choice I've made.
As soon as you see like a game losing popularity, you can look at the directory and see that all of the people that used to be getting, like say 5,000 viewers, now they're getting 1,000 viewers, and it just keeps going down. So I think that the biggest risk whenever you're becoming a specialized content creator is that whenever you are playing a game that doesn't really have an audience large enough to necessitate you only playing that game. So for example, people that only play Minecraft, they can do it because Minecraft is like the biggest game in the world. People that play Fortnite, many of them can do it too. But I think that once you get into smaller games with smaller audiences, that's whenever it becomes less sustainable and a lot more volatile, because you're much more at the whims of the current state of that individual game. Like I know this for WoW, is that in WoW, like there would be sometimes back in like Legion where I'd have 10,000 viewers, or I think during the Tomb of Sargeras release, I had 25,000 viewers. It was insane. And then the next couple of days, I went back down to 4. And so that's a huge difference. And that's what happens whenever you're just making content for one specific game, is that your popularity is tied to that game.
The reason that I started creating content the way that I do, which is entirely about Warframe, is because I completed Warframe. I decided that the end game of Warframe now for me, which is still a thing that was up for debate, the end game for me now is that I am a content creator now, and I am going to help the new players. I became that type of creator purely based on the love of the game, and whether or not it was going to succeed or fail, I was just going to go in that direction because I really like Warframe a lot. It is my favorite game. The difference for general creation is that you do get, a much more narrow view at any game. And the unfortunate bit about that is that it means that if you do stumble across that game, like if you stumble across your Warframe, you probably won't be able to spend as much time with it as you'd really want to. And also it would be hard to focus in your, large general audience into the specifics of what you now want to get into.
It's a tough thing to do because, as you said, you miss out on some of the more specific details that hyper fans of that game would expect to see. But at the same time, you actually have a lot more knowledge of the general genre, and that can be invaluable in the sense that when I'm reviewing New World, I can use my knowledge of Mortal Online, my knowledge of RuneScape and Terra, not Terra, not Terra anymore. But any of those games as a kind of cross-reference, right? I can review it in a more unbiased way. However, you are correct in the sense that being a specialized content creator gives you all these extra details, all this information that's super important to a lot of people. If a content creator starts out with New World and they ride the massive hype train at the beginning, they're going to come crashing down with it as well. If they don't diversify, it's like, the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
I think algorithmically, you're setting yourself up for a world of depression and anxiety and even mental health problems that they're going to challenge you and push you and make you question your own sanity. So the thing about being generalized, it's very valuable to your mental health. The thing about being specific is that as a career, that's a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche. And so the solution that I've actually developed is what I do is multi-channel. So I have a New World focused channel. I have a Final Fantasy focused channel. When it comes down to it, I think a handful of games is the best way, but algorithmically, you have to actually multi-channel because the algorithm is going to hit you.
You have more freedom to do whatever you want, because it's not just tying your channel to that game. It's also tying that you have to make videos about that game, which means if you stop enjoying it, then what else are you going to do? You're going to have to pivot at some point, or like you say, your channel's going to die. So I think the benefit is just having more freedom to do whatever you want.
The benefits of specializing are if a top-tier MMO ever does come out that you get hooked into, then there's new content with every update, and you become the authority figure of that game, and you'll likely be invited to community events or even get offered a community manager backup job, as has happened with RuneScape and Guild Wars 2 content creators in the past. Because you're a niche within a niche, and you'll find it easier to grow your content than immediately starting out with general MMO stuff. However, you will have a harder time branching out later on. The downsides are game-specific MMO channels have limited view potential. If the game dies, so does your channel. And people that know your channel for that game will complain if you try to cover any new games.
If you're hyper specialized, you're tying your success to to someone else's success, which is always like a risky endeavor. I mean, I always think of, say, there's this Red Dead Online tips channel. First of all, rest in peace, Red Dead Online. You almost had something. That first year or two was insane potential, and now you see these channels, and every week they're just putting out these very sad, like, here's what to do this week in Red Dead Online, and it's, spoiler alert, not a lot. I think going for the general approach, which you've done, is safer in terms of your own longevity. And like you say, there is definitely that potential for people to disregard your opinion because you haven't, tied yourself down. You haven't married a game per se. Having an authoritative British accent does help. So I can recommend that.
A creator that is sticking to a specific game to make a transition over to another game. I've seen this happen repeatedly in games like Overwatch, where YouTubers that average 20, 40, 50,000 views for their videos, and they're averaging 3,000 viewers for their streams. They get bored. When they decide that they want to transition over to another game, their viewership drops by 90%. That we've seen people, thousands, drop down to just hundreds of viewers. That is the unfortunate state of, I guess, being like a content creator that focuses on one single specific game. Because if you ever do make that transition, you're essentially killing your career if you pursue it as a career. With regards to having it as more of a general channel, you're also severely limiting yourself because at the same time, people don't necessarily view you as an authority, and therefore they don't choose to go to you for information.
I think actually, contrary to popular belief, most of us started as specialist YouTubers and then kind of branched off to other things. And I think that just makes the most logical sense because just like with MMOs, like you're saying, another life, many of us spend so much time in one particular game. So then we become like, okay, let's talk about this game. And like for me, for example, I started a channel in large part on the series based on Galaxies. That was because Galaxies was the game that I had the most experience with. And so then I realized like, oh, okay, like there's actually other ones that I could talk about and other games that I could then cover. Not a lot of MMO players actually play a lot of MMOs. As weird as that sounds, throughout my entire life, I've actually can count on my hands the amount of friends I've had that actually play all the MMOs. Like they play everything. And so I think that being a content creator in one particular game, there's a lot of benefit from it. Like you said, you get to look more into the nuance of things versus like what we do, which is sometimes less practical for some people. It's harder to do, harder to be a known entity and then be taken seriously in a bunch of different games. I think that's just really hard to do. Beyond playing a bunch of games, just knowing enough to even be able to approach all of these different games and talk about them in a good way.
If you want to be seen as a professional content creator with a certain amount of authority, then you would focus on a specific game. But the downside of that is not only is your success tied to the success of that game, but also your opinion of that game is incredibly jaded because you've never experienced another MMO in detail at all, so you have nothing to compare it to. You also can never ever satisfy a viewer if you are a general MMO channel because you are never able to put in the hours, the blood, sweat, tears, dedication that a player that spent hours and hours and hours on that game. You will never be on their level. You will never have their opinion. You will never be able to give them the confirmation bias that they're looking for because you simply don't have the experience.
In general, most players just play the game a little bit. They might play for a little while, but they might even play multiple MMOs at the same time. So going like super, super deep into the analysis, that's kind of not exactly what the majority of people are really looking for, right? You want to know, oh, this is how the systems work, right? This is what you can do. These are all the different game modes that you can participate in. That really is the bread and butter of the kind of MMO demographic for sure. In terms of pitfalls, I think you're absolutely right. The big pitfall with general is that you're not going to be seen as this like, oh, mega, yes, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. And that might actually cause players to potentially dismiss your opinion within that community that you're speaking to.
It's inevitable that that game pretty much links to your success in a lot of ways. When you're looking at just MMOs in general, when you're focusing on a genre, you've got a lot of room to move in, right? And also you can do things like you can step out, I guess, with the NFT situation. That was a really good example of you're talking about something different, but it does still relate to that. So there are those opportunities. So obviously I'm focusing on different genres. That gives me a lot of room to breathe. And I did actually think to myself, you know, what does actually make me the authority, or what makes my content, you know, what will make my content worth watching, and why should somebody watch me?
Final Fantasy XIV pays my bills. I play MMORPGs as a genre. That's what I make content for. I play other games. I like mobile games. I like shooters. I like racing games. But MMORPGs are what I'm known for. If we're just talking analytics, Final Fantasy XIV pays overwhelmingly for my mortgage. I still play Guild Wars at least one day a week on stream, and I'm trying to grow that because, A, I think it's important for my own well-being as a gamer and as somebody to have broad things. And B, what happens if Final Fantasy XIV has a down cycle? I have everything tied to Final Fantasy. And so that's really scary because they do have down cycles. And you see them coming. That's the worst part, is as somebody who becomes an expert in either one game or in one genre of that game, if you're tied to PvP seasons or a raid, you know when the content's coming, maybe even before the people watching. You know, I'm making this video and this is going to be the last big thing that people look forward to for 3 months, 4 months, 8 months, or in some games, they have unpredictable patch cycles. I have no idea how people make full-time livings out of games that don't have a predictable patch cycle.
I mean, by catering to a very specific niche, it might be more easy to grow as a small creator compared to trying to tackle everything at once when you're brand new and you don't, like, nobody really knows who you are yet. So I have the benefit of the Final Fantasy franchise, which seems to have quite a bit of longevity. So I do have a little bit of job security from that aspect. I'm also associated with World of Warcraft, and being associated with a particular developer can help because you might be able to follow where the player base goes. As a general content creator, like general MMO content creator, that you are not able to see all the nuance of a particular game. But if you spent more of your free time playing not Guild Wars or not RuneScape, then you would be able to learn more about particular MMOs.
Okay, I'm going to edit that out, but how dare you? We're not here to take cheap pot shots at each other. This is not... This can lead to both types of channels wanting what the other has. The general channels want the admiration and respect from the fanbase that specialist channels command, and the specialist channels want the multi-game appeal and broad channel safety of a general channel. But how can you do both? One trick is to specialise into a single aspect of the genre, so you're still niching down, but not to a specific game. I have my Worst MMO Ever series, a light-hearted entertainment-focused journey to play all of the MMOs in a quest to find the worst. It started only playing truly terrible MMOs and has since included some decent ones for reasons I'll explain more in point 5. The Lazy Peon has his first impression videos where he gives a broad overview of the major mechanics in many games and discusses the pros and cons. Kira TV focuses on Kickstarter scams or dodgy integration of crypto within MMOs and then makes longer form essays on why specific games failed. So many general MMO channels still cover multiple games, but now through a slightly more specialised lens without limiting themselves to a single game. But ultimately, there is simply not enough time to become an expert on every single MMO, so a general channel will always be limited in the depth of knowledge, while a specific channel will be limited in its scope of audience. Sometimes people ask me, because I'm a general MMO channel, why haven't I completed every single MMO ever made to endgame? And whenever I'm asked that, I'm reminded of a fantastic line from the TV show NCIS, a show famous for not understanding how technology works. If you haven't seen it, it's the show with the infamous hacking scene, 2 people trying to type on the same keyboard at the same time to out-hack the hacker. In Season 8, Episode 16, a detective meets a famous gamer. He's expecting a socially inept guy and gets an attractive early 20s woman. The detective says, "Wait a second, you're Max Destructo. You hold the high score in practically every online game." That is, of course, absurd. No one person could hold every high score. In a similar vein, even if a general MMO content creator wanted to finish every MMO, they couldn't do it while also producing the quantity of content the YouTube algorithm demands. And this brings us to point 4, the sheer amount of time finishing an MMO takes compared to finishing almost any other game. MMOs are thousands of hours long, and playtime will vary massively from player to player, but we can use the website How Long to Beat for an extremely general overview. The average completion time for Final Fantasy XIV, this is just the main story, ranges from 105 hours to 1,531 hours from a poll of around 300 people. Guild Wars 2 clocks in at between 241 and 1,500 hours, and The Elder Scrolls Online is listed as between 42 and 348, depending on your efficiency. These aren't completionist times, nowhere near. Indeed, very few people will ever 100% complete an MMO. Achievements such as God walking amongst mere mortals in Guild Wars 1 or a maxed hardcore Iron Man in old school RuneScape are extremely rare, and you would not and should not expect a reviewer to achieve these types of things before reviewing a game. The question is, how much time is required, and how many other games could you review in that same time? And this links heavily back to why mainstream gaming media chooses to avoid even attempting to review MMOs. Now, whenever I ask around, the number 100 hours gets thrown around a lot, probably because it's a nice round number, it's the first triple-digit number, and many would agree that after 100 hours, even if you haven't finished the entire game, you will have enough information to make an informed review. And while 100 hours may sound like a long time to the average person, the time sink nature of MMOs can warp what a hardcore MMO player considers a long time. But let's have a look at how many other games you could review and how much alternative content you could produce in 100 hours. I have a second YouTube channel called Josh Strife Plays, where I replay and review older video games. Let's take a random sample of 10. Castlevania Symphony of the Night took me 9 hours to beat. Devil May Cry 1 took 7. Silent Hill 1 took 8. Tomb Raider took 9. Baldur's Gate took 22. Armored Core was 8. Medieval took 8. Soul Reaver took 9. Tenchu took 9. And Rayman took 7. Combined, this is 96 hours. So when someone says to me they expect me to invest 100 hours into a single MMO before my review is considered valid, as a content creator, you could instead replay 10 of the most iconic video games of all time and make review videos on them which would appeal to a much broader audience. As a content creator, you have to be aware of how much time you're spending making content. If you were to make a 100-hour review of the 5 big MMORPGs, that's 500 collective hours put into 5 videos. You could make 50 smaller videos in that time. That's almost 1 video a week for an entire year, which would be much more efficient to grow a brand new YouTube channel. YouTube requires constant content, and putting hundreds of hours into gathering footage for a video is a luxury very few smaller creators have. As Ginger Prime puts it, MMOs are not only tribal by game design, but by business model. They're designed to create that in-group and then ask for both time and money from the in-group, from either subscriptions or an in-game cash shop. And if paying a lot of money over a long period of time is also required to reach the minimum requirement to review something, many simply won't bother. For older MMOs, that can become an almost impossible challenge for a new content creator. If the game has 10, 15, or even 20 years worth of content and you approach it as a brand new content creator and you're expected to play through all of it before making a video, you're spending months, potentially years of your time to gather data and increase your experience to make a video that might not even be relevant by the time you get to making it. The content may have changed, or the YouTube and Twitch viewer base may have dropped off, meaning your time investment into what could have been your career can be lost.
I think that it's very much about how you present the review. Like, you can have a review, you can have a breakdown, you can have a first impressions, etc. So if you play a game and it's your first impressions of the game, other people can kind of take that as, hey, this is their first impressions of the game, and that's really all there is to it. And I think it's also about how you compartmentalize different parts of reviews. So, like, for example, whenever you're looking at, let's say, Final Fantasy, you can give a review of, I don't know, maybe Palace of the Dead, or maybe a certain type of raid, or, you know, like all the Heaven's Word MSQ or something like that. You can give a compartmentalized review of that without necessarily making a general statement on the quality of the game as a whole. Like, obviously it all ties into that, but those things can exist independently. So I think that's one way that you can review the game. But I think that it's just about how somebody frames the review of the game.
If you're 20 hours in and this is the quest that you're on, you haven't experienced X, Y, and Z. And because you haven't experienced those things, you don't know that, oh, at Z, it gets really bad. It gets terrible. So, of course, he loves it. Of course, he's having a great time right now. And of course, usually people will tell you that in the comments that you haven't reached the good part or you haven't reached the bad part yet. But what's important is just to temper expectations, I think, for how much time you have put in. And for larger publications like IGN and stuff, it obviously it will never make sense for them to really cover MMOs, because at the point where you're putting in the man hours to fully cover, like do a full review of like beat the game, similar to how you would say you beat God of War, and now, well, I'm going to talk about the entirety of the game. I have this large article here. If you did a similar thing with World of Warcraft, it would take that person multiple years. And if you're having that person on payroll for multiple years just to get one article, that's never going to be worth it.
I would say 10 hours is probably a good baseline, and it should be. Like, 10 hours of gameplay in an MMO should introduce you to most of, if not all, of the systems that you're going to see as you progress through this game. But for some reason, MMOs have this thing now where the first 10 hours very rarely represent what the entire game is. And this is where you need to play 50 hours, 100 hours. If the game completely shifts after the first 10 hours, the review's good for no one anyway.
You could put 0 minutes into it as long as you set the context of like, hey, I just booted up the game and here's my initial thought. Because essentially the people look for reviews to validate their own feelings, in that regards. So I wouldn't put an hour limit on it. I think when it comes down to it, like 1,000 hours makes you considered an expert in something of that nature. So if they're saying 100 hours is going to qualify for review, so it's like I'm 1/10 of an expert on the subject. For an MMORPG, I think it's not about the time. It's about the context of what you've experienced, what you maybe have experienced before, where you're coming from, and then essentially kind of talking about what systems you've touched and engaged with. Let's say you did 10 hours in an MMO and you wanted to make a video about it. Well, I think that essentially then the video should be then asking the question, am I willing to invest another 10 hours or another 30 hours into the game, right? Because that's essentially what I would be curious about and be looking for.
The criticisms you're going to have in the first 10 hours are probably going to be the same criticisms you can have later, but you might have a different perspective on what is a totally different game, endgame, which most MMOs are. So I don't think you can't have an opinion if you don't spend 100 hours. I think in general, your opinion's probably going to help more people because they're going to quit or experience the same things in the same time that you did. And most people are just looking for, can I have fun in this game now? Not, can I invest 100 hours and then have fun?
If you hate the core fundamental gameplay, movement, combat, audio-visual feedback, or responsiveness so much in the first 2 hours that no amount of well-designed endgame would be enough to make the game fun, then you can review it for as little as those hours, but call it a first impression. Ideally aim for 4 to 8 hours with the first impressions, and if you're still enjoying the game, push through to the end game for a full review. MMOs have many different parts of them. The leveling process may be mostly irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but this is also where the most people quit, so critique here is certainly valid. You need to break up the review process into multiple videos for different parts of the experience, or do one big 45-minute review covering it as a whole. There's no set amount of hours, but if you're reviewing games purely for your job, it's only really doable with MMOs if you take the first impression route, as you can't really put hundreds of hours into each video for each game.
Obviously, very much depends on the game, but there's something, say like New World, you could get to level 30 in that game and be like, I've seen it all. I don't need to get to level 60. This is pretty much it, and I cannot imagine what they could possibly pull out of the hat at level 60 that would suddenly 180 my opinion of everything up until that point. So I feel like, how much does this game respect your time, and then give it that equal level of respect? Because if a game is 100 hours, but it's 100 hours of incredible fun that you don't want to put down, you're just going to do that and not think twice about it. Versus if you're like not looking forward to playing a video game, which is a entertaining medium, I feel like you don't really need to play more than that to kind of have your whole opinion on it. And I know some people will argue, well, after 100 hours it gets really good, but it's like, well, maybe it should get good 100 hours earlier. I think that's a flawed argument.
Unfortunately, you run into the issue where older games, first and foremost, require a lot more investment in terms of time, in terms of resources to actually learn, to actually get through the content. I went back into Rapples, I went back into RF Online. Getting from level 1 to level 20 took, I don't know, 15, 20 hours. And Rapples, as an example, the level cap is over 300. And they tell you that it takes about 1,000 hours to even get the end game. To put in 100 hours into Rapples is the tutorial. So these old games, it doesn't matter if you put 100 hours into them, you are not going to please the people that are still actively playing them.
I'm glad that you make the distinction, because it probably is much easier for someone who's just only focused on one to then expect them to have like the super deep dive. Like a content creator I follow on Guild Wars 2 is Mighty Teapot, and Mighty Teapot pretty much only does Guild Wars 2, maybe some New World, but like only Guild Wars 2. And so you can pretty much guarantee that Mighty Teapot knows everything about Guild Wars 2. So like you're never gonna miss anything. But it's gonna take Mighty Teapot some time to come up with all of this stuff, because they primarily stream, they don't make as many YouTube videos, the guides take more time, and so on and so forth. So I would say that with them, you would expect them to put as much time as possible, and then the kind of when it's ready approach. For starters, your point is the exact point that usually I make to people, which is like I use KOTOR 1 or KOTOR 2 as an example, which at most those games take 15, 20 hours. So like these games are considered like people's favorite games, and it's like these games do not take very long to beat at all. And so when you compare them to just WoW Classic, which on average took players anywhere between 200 and 400 hours to reach max level, which is honestly like not that much if you think about it in an MMO grinder context, but in a large gaming context, it's an insane amount. I mean, it's like that's like the amount of hours you put in a shooter, you know, that you play for a year or two or so on and so forth. And so
100 hours is just incredibly unrealistic. I do understand where general viewers would come from to expect a content creator to put 100 hours into a game, but realistically, that's not going to happen. And I think that specifically MMORPGs are supposed to replicate different people's lives, and so have so many different paths to take that it's almost impossible to cover that. Just looking at character creation, a lot of games have multiple different starting paths. And for a viewer to expect a reviewer to experience multiple different class paths before even playing the game in order to give a valid opinion is just completely unrealistic.
Depend on the creator and what type of review that you want to create. For example, I don't think every MMO review needs to talk about raiding. I don't think every MMO review needs to talk about PvP. Right? I think you could bring that up, right? You can say, oh yeah, this is a game, and you can kind of give a brief overview. But I don't think you necessarily need to go into a deep dive about this. But I think there are certainly different types of review that may not require as much of this extreme time investment to get a proper grip on, I'd say.
I mean, yeah, I'll stand by that. I don't think that's viable. Okay, and I think as well, as long as you have that communication as a creator between you and your audience, to be realistic, so they understand that there has to be a certain amount of there has to be a limit. 100 hours until it gets good, or until you can really do a full review. Okay, great. I guarantee that if you were to compare that as well to, let's say you spend 20 hours. Now, personally, I've spent Biomutant was about 20 hours, and even then I wasn't completely finished. But I made it quite clear that I spent a set amount of time in this game. Right, I was just very transparent about it. If somebody wants to say, well, it gets better after 100 hours, I'll be like, fine, okay, maybe it does. But then the question is, does everybody have 100 hours? I mean, maybe in the MMO space, but when it comes to more general games, do people really have that time within a week or even a month? Most of the people that watch my videos are most likely working full-time jobs.
Taking on the MMORPG, this is a lot closer to trying to review a television show or a podcast series or like Critical Role or an anime, something that is episodic. By that very nature, that also means that it's a living document. So I think it's about context. And so if you are trying to get into Final Fantasy XIV and you go ask 10 people that play it, what's the biggest parts of Final Fantasy XIV? They say, the story. Then I think you need to clear the story. And I don't really care if it takes you 100 hours or 300 hours or 60 hours. I don't care. You need to finish the reason you're there. These are the things I'm looking for. There have been people that have reviewed MMOs in the past and been yelled at. I think you're even talking to some of those people. And I think it's because they've come into them and said, are they good or are they bad? And those people, I didn't actually have a problem with their opinion if they had made their opinion very contextually clear.
For example, in Final Fantasy XIV, it's well known that it can take you hundreds of hours to reach endgame. As a new person who is wanting to review Final Fantasy XIV, provided you're not using a skip or anything, which is, by the way, illegal, then you would only be able to review the story, really, and maybe a little bit of the limited low-level content. At low levels, your job is not going to feel anything like it would at max level. So basically, if someone wants to review Final Fantasy XIV, they can't until they've gone through hundreds of hours of story and not done any skips and read all of the dialogue and watched all of the cutscenes. And only after they finish all of it, all the main story, and they maybe do their first dungeon or trial, then they're allowed to give a review on Final Fantasy XIV.
But what if you could put hundreds or thousands of hours and lots of money into a video? Well, then you'd hope it would be a video which remains relevant for a long time, what we call evergreen content on YouTube. Unfortunately, because MMOs are being constantly updated, very little content created for them can be evergreen, especially if that content is a build or a guide video, which can change when the next patch or expansion comes out. And this causes a strange feedback loop, where the most efficient type of content to make as a creator is also seen as the lowest effort by the audience. And this is part 5, the time-sensitive nature of MMORPG content pushing creators to release content before it is ready or to make repetitive videos. If you spend 100 hours making a thorough in-depth review of an MMO, it will remain at the top of the YouTube results until an update or patch comes out and someone else makes another video with that update or patch number in the title, because that's what people are now searching for and that's what the algorithm will now serve up. This links back to the viability of making one MMO video in the same time that you could make 10 older game reviews. The MMO will change and your video will become obsolete, but the older games will not. It is almost impossible to make evergreen content on any MMO because any living MMO is itself not evergreen. Ironically, the only way to create evergreen content for an MMO is to make a video about a dead or dying one, because they are the only ones which don't get updated and don't have huge competitions for video search results. And then when your review or guide becomes old, which can happen in months on YouTube, it will fall down the video search results, so you'll need to remake it. And if you're putting in hundreds of hours for every video, you simply won't be able to put out enough guides for enough games within the time frame you have. This means MMO content creators know that the best type of content for audience engagement and search engine optimization are not videos locked to a specific build or version of any given game, but instead are videos which are being searched for right now, titles which people will Google, titles like Best MMO in current year, Top 10 MMOs to play in current year, should you play game name here, best class build, fastest experience, fastest gold. And these types of videos are quick to make because you don't even need to be an expert on the game to know the method. You can usually find it on the wiki, and you can easily remake these videos every few months to remain relevant within the search results. You could, of course, be a general MMO creator and make content for the lesser known games, guides for games with very few players and very little competition. But the time investment is still the same, and you now know that the views will be abysmal because the player base simply isn't there. 10% of a 1,000,000-person player base is still more than 100% of a 100-person player base. Players want content for their MMO, and the vast majority of the MMO player base is centralized on the big ones, such as World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars 2, and RuneScape. This means you want to make content for those games, but you don't want to invest your time in content you know will become irrelevant. This is also why I've had to include some newer, higher quality MMOs in my worst MMO ever series. From a purely analytical standpoint, there are simply more people searching for those games. And as a full-time content creator, I need to balance the truly awful games which get viewed less with the rage bait of including actually quite good games which get viewed a lot more. Beyond this, there is another major factor. Being the first to report on a game or an update within a game often brings the most views, even if you're not the highest quality, because interest is at its maximum right then. In the gaming world, a week is a lifetime. A month is ancient history. If an event is newsworthy, it's being searched for right now. This means as a content creator, you are caught in a balancing act. The longer you work on a video, the higher quality it will be, but the subject itself is becoming less and less relevant by the hour, meaning even if it's high quality, it won't get as many views. When a new raid or a new dungeon is released into an MMO, people want a guide video instantly, and if you make the first guide video, you'll get views. If you make the best guide video a month later, you'll now be fighting an uphill battle against the YouTube algorithm because it already has that search result covered and that video already exists. The only way your video would have any value is if there is new information in your video that's not contained in the old one, in which case your video might become popular, and it will stay popular right up until there is another patch or another expansion and someone else puts 100 hours in and makes their video which overtakes yours. It is impossible to know how long your video will remain relevant for, which means it's impossible to know how much time is worth putting into it. The solution for a creator is to be both the first person to release a video and then the person releasing constant updates to always be at the top. From an audience point of view, however, this means they get a flood of very similar videos.
That's the same thing. It's like everybody complains on YouTube. They're like, man, I hate these pog faces every time. Everybody's got this surprised face for every YouTube thumbnail. Oh my God, right? And everybody complains about it, but they just keep clicking on them. So you just keep having more of these videos. It's the feedback loop is there. And so it just keeps happening. I think this is kind of what I was saying before with like whenever I would make these WoW guide videos, I would put in a tremendous amount of effort how to min-max and figure out the most optimized way of farming some material in WoW, and it would get 20,000 views. And it's like, okay. But then if I made a video about how Burning Crusade is way better than the current expansion, that would have 250,000 views. And it would be on the top of Reddit. Everybody would be saying true. I'd get way more subscribers. It would just be better for me in every single way. And I think that, again, the way that you reconcile those two things is that you have to look at what being a content creator means for you. Does this mean that you are just creating content that you feel is good for the algorithm, or are you creating something that you think is a creative endeavor in itself?
A really interesting balance between these two things, because ideally you're making a video that really is both. And for games that run long enough, which is a thing that I've seen with Warframe, you'll make a video that was, a really long experience to make and that was, very popular because a lot of work was put into it at the time, and because a lot of work was put into it, people see that and it gets shared around. And you can see that with some of my old full Warframe roster reviews. I talk about every single class in the game, why they're good, why they're bad, give them a grade. People love those videos, and I continue to make those. The original, well, all of them at this point are completely obsolete. As for just making like the shorter content that like gets more views, you should be making that. It's a balance between trying to do both. I very recently went through and I did every single Warframe individually in each different video, and that's been going on over the course of this year. Obviously, I've made videos about pretty much all of those Warframes before, but those videos became outdated, and this was me updating all of them. Some of those videos already have minor things that I would change about them, even though I just made them this year due to new content being released.
As a content creator, it is impossible to fully re-review a game from scratch because, as you said, everything's got a shelf life. If you're putting like 300-400 hours into a full review of the game every year, by time you've done that review, it's dead on arrival. I feel for content creators doing that, it is definitely much easier to make the initial long review where you've put 10, 20, 30 hours in, depending on what your kind of time frame budget is for that. And then when there's an update, add your own update as a sort of addendum to your original review. As long as you're kind of referencing that initial review and saying, here's kind of like my patch notes for the game since the new patch notes, I feel that's the best way to do it. The people that are watching those videos are most often going to be people who play the game anyway. They're aware of what the current situation on that game is, or at least I feel that that's the way people view these videos.
The more time you spend on a video, the less views it will get. And that's just like, and I always would say like, well, if I want to put that time into this video because it's important to me, then I will. It's not low effort content. It's the content that people are asking for. And the content creator can sit down and say like, oh, I want to make something. I see people do this all the time. Like and it's important. I'll make videos that I want to make that I know aren't going to do well on purpose because I wanted to make that video. I wanted that video to exist. The smart thing is to create stuff that people want, because I mean, especially if you want it to be viewed. It's the concept when people are like, oh, you just posting that for the views. Who hits anything on a public space and hopes that no one sees it?
It depends really what you're chasing. Are you trying to grow your channel as quickly as possible? Are you doing videos that you think has value? Because personally, I've never seen should you do X in Y year, or should you, top 10 MMOs of 2022 when they're the same for the last 5 years. I don't see that being valuable, so I don't personally chase that, but I don't look down on people who do. I think just make the content you want to make, and if people do want to watch those videos, so if you want to serve that market, that's totally fine. People have a perception about you and they're going to stick with that regardless. You can spend, like I did, hundreds, thousands of hours looking into a game like New World, for example, and people who disagree with you will still just vehemently disagree with you anyway on the basis you don't know what you're talking about, despite being proven right, time and time again. So I don't really look at it that way. I just do whatever I think's gonna make sense, gonna be fun for me, gonna get views if that's what I'm going for, and then that's it. I don't really think more about it.
I think the should you play X game in X year approach is good because people often YouTube search and click on the latest videos for each MMO due to them all being constantly updated.
I think I would try and find the sort of happy medium that someone like you or Lazy Peon does, because I look up these guides, I look up, oh, should you still play this game in this year? What's the best class, But it's very transactional, and I usually don't stick around on that person's channel. I guess finding that medium of, I mean, it's never going to be evergreen, but to give it the longest shelf life possible. And I think, say, with your worst MMO ever series, that's, again, unless they somehow pull some crazy shit out of the hat and completely change the game that you review, and it's all of a sudden now a kart racer, I feel like that review is going to stay relevant for quite a long time, at least a year or two.
Well, I guess at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, are you doing it for profit or as a passion? If you're doing it for a profit, you're going to target whatever has the highest volume of searches, both on YouTube and on Google. As a passion, then you're going to focus on covering whatever is most important to you. Content creators that do, is X game worth playing in X year, are doing that because they know people are searching for, is Black Desert fun in 2021? Is it fun in 2022? It might have been fun in 2021, but next year in 2023, is it still going to be relevant? But then you run into the issue of you're just making the same videos, because as like Black Desert, as an example, they just released a new class, maybe a new region, but it's the same game. So yeah, you can push out, is Black Desert worth playing every year? But you're stifling your own creativity in doing so.
Sometimes you get stuck in just making one versus the other. And for example, I have made guide content and shorter type stuff before, but it never really resonated with me. So the evergreen style content was what I was most interested in. But you are right in that trying to make that about current content ends up being incredibly difficult. For example, I made a video that talks about the successes and tribulations and history of Final Fantasy XIV, but that is 2 expansions old already, and it feels completely outdated. Part of the difficulty I find with that just in general, and making evergreen content that isn't based on a historical timeline, is difficult in the sense that people don't as much as you might think want to be educated, and especially don't want to be educated in a heavy-handed way. That's kind of why some content creators like myself don't make as much evergreen content in a modern day context, because a lot of it relies on recognizing what's happening in the space and paying attention to the market. And while those are cool things and very interesting to me, to you, to I'm sure a lot of people watching or listening, it's not always the most popular and attractive thing to a general populace.
I've created a lot of short-term content that exists for a certain period of time and then immediately becomes obsolete within a couple of weeks. Things like mount guide videos for a mount that's just released, or a raid guide video for a raid that's just been released. Those videos do exceptionally well within the first week, but then after that, it drops off significantly. I think so long as you are able to create a video that's entertaining, tells a story, keeps the viewer engaged, then it almost doesn't matter what the shelf life of the video is, because it will continue to draw people in just on the way that you make the video.
Really hard to do this, particularly if you're a newer creator. It's really hard to make MMO content because, before you're in that position where you can start to talk about the more evergreen stuff, you need your 100 hours, right? You've got to have your 100 hours. So what are you making in your content creation in the first 100 hours? You could almost broaden this to almost a critique of content creation in general. I wouldn't say this is actually unique to MMOs as such. But yeah, it certainly becomes more extreme because of the fact it's not like, oh yeah, this video is going to be here forever. No, you're going to have to make it again, right? Good luck, right? And every time, even if you make something like a guide, well, the guide might change, right? There's going to be something new. There's going to be a new gold farming method. There's going to be a new balance patch. There's going to be a new this, that, and whatever, right? I think that, a lot of stuff that is going to be more popular isn't necessarily going to be the highest effort, right? Because, in general, you want to try and create, well, as much content as possible, right? On the hottest stuff right now. And if you try and make something that's, like super well crafted, like super high effort, you're going to kind of miss the boat, right? A lot of the time.
My video is only going to be good for 3 months. My stream is only going to appeal to 6 people. But there's a beauty in that. There is a beauty in realizing the world doesn't revolve around me. And so that thing can be just that thing. And so I get to make that video. And yes, it expires in a year. And you know what else happens in a year? I hopefully get better. And so that video expiring is a chance to redo it. How many times do you do something, right? Back to Warhammer. How many times do you paint a model only to realize, I wish that I could paint my model that from before as well as I can paint my model now?
You do need to be aware of what the algorithm demands. You have to feed the beast whatever we are guessing that it wants at a particular time. And so a lot of times YouTubers just, they create content that will please the algorithm. But of course, I have been in the situation where I have made videos, giant videos, knowing that they would become outdated. Like I made a mount guide showing every mount in the game a couple years ago. And now there are obviously more mounts in the game. And I made it thinking, well, I'll just put it out. And after enough time has passed, well, I'll make another one. I guess it's probably due for that fairly soon. We have something in Palm written called the live letter. And the live letter is where Yoshi P talks about all of the upcoming features that are going to be in the next major patch. And this is like a big newsy piece of content that is very important. It's very time sensitive. Usually these things happen on a Friday. And there was a time when I would be like, well, I'll just take my time on it and release it on Monday. And that was not really working out that well. I mean, hell, there were times when I would release that video on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Eventually, after some trial and error, I realized that is not the way to go. So now usually during the live letter, I'm taking notes and I am immediately working as fast as I can to get it done as quickly as possible. But I do also, I have a quality standard, and every YouTuber is going to have to set that standard for themselves, right? Even if it means after something like that happened, if I need to work 12 hours, 14 hours to get it done quickly, I will in that particular case. Now, you can't do that all the time. You will burn yourself out doing that all the time.
But there's another aspect to consider. As useful as maxed level endgame guides are, they don't actually serve the majority of the player base. Most new players don't become maxed level endgame players. This brings us to problem 6 in MMORPG content creation, the extreme switch in player experience from the very start to the very end of the game. The vast majority of any MMO's player base will experience the opening and the middle bit, but not the hardcore end bit. Many new players, especially casuals, aren't even thinking about the ending, and if the beginning isn't good, no amount of telling them it gets better will make them stay. So it can be wise to make content aimed at the new player, such as beginner's guides and first impressions, but this is again another major issue with the MMORPG content creation process. Many long-time players will tell you that their MMORPG game gets better at endgame. Some will tell you that it completely changes the experience. And while I'm sure that's true, it's also incredibly frustrating to approach MMOs knowing this as a reviewer, because it's one of the few mediums that prides itself on being so vastly different from its opening to its ending experience. Imagine watching the first 90% of a TV show only for the final 10% to have a different cast and style. Imagine the final few chapters of a romance book suddenly changing to a choose-your-own-adventure picture book. Imagine the first 100 hours of a first-person shooter game being slow-paced and cover-based only to switch to a third-person hack-and-slash once you hit maximum level. It sounds absurd to advertise the extreme gameplay switch as a positive, but the MMO does just that. The opening of the MMO game, the part the majority of players will experience, is often nothing like the endgame, and this makes the reviewing of MMOs extremely difficult. If a content creator plays a brand new MMO they've never played before and gives it a decent amount of time, let's say 20 or 30 hours, and then makes a review based on the experience they had in that 20 or 30 hours, that is a valid first impression. It was what they experienced. If, however, those 20 or 30 hours are not a good representation of what the game actually is, that's not an issue with the creator's experience, that's an issue with the pacing and design of the game. Of course, no one is expecting a player to become all-powerful within 20 or 30 hours. No one is saying you can experience all the content. You will likely barely scratch the surface. But if the opening 20 to 30 of your game is not an accurate representation of your game's strengths or the type of fun and gameplay a player can expect to be working toward, why are they there? There is no other form of entertainment media so self-indulgent as to demand the user slog through an inferior version of itself before rewarding them with the superior version. It's strange to a non-MMO player to see that we as a community have come to not only accept but almost expect the genre to treat its best content as a reward for enduring its worst. Unfortunately, this design trope of it gets better at endgame is so ingrained in the MMO community's mindset that as an MMO creator, you are often left thinking, I know this opening section is going to be irrelevant later, but I also know it's the only section a massive amount of players will ever experience. So do I review this as a relevant bit of the game and risk angering the established player base who will tell me, this isn't the good bit, why are you focusing on this? Or do I ignore this bit and rush to the good bit and risk alienating the new players who wanted a genuine review to show the actual experience they are going to have, boring opening included? Reviewing an MMO often feels like reviewing multiple games because the MMO itself morphs so frequently into multiple different experiences.
And so I've seen modern MMOs actually kind of grow in that level of friction. It's not that the end game is different from the start of the game. Ideally, it's all the same. It's just new content that exists. And then I can then create videos that talk about the content experience rather than the end game experience.
Like you can do the first impressions video and you can do the full on like end game review and service two different markets with those two videos. And it's not like one doesn't have value or devalues the other one, because first impressions are what most people are looking for. Is this game worth my time? Am I going to enjoy the process before I get to the end game and spend all that time? Because the vast majority of people don't have, 100 hours to just put into every game to see whether it's good or not. And if they don't enjoy the initial experience, they're probably going to go and find something else, maybe not an MMO, that they will enjoy the initial experience of. So I think they both have value.
People who are already invested in their MMO will not recognise the importance of first impressions when it comes to new player retention, even if you have to go through 50 to 100 hours of pure boredom to get to the fun part. You could have the most crap leveling experience ever, pure suffering, and if someone says they quit because the leveling sucked, you'll get a comment going, well, it gets good at the end game. People who are already invested in the game no longer care about the new player experience because they're past it, even though in the long run, their game may have less players as a result of this experience being bad. I think you just need to explain why an MMO's first impressions are important during the video. You could have the best endgame ever, but if nobody gets to it, what's the point?
I mean, again, you're never going to make everyone happy. There's just no way to, but... So reviewing a video game, you can do in 20 hours, you can do in 40 hours, because you can go from start to finish, you can complete it, you can cover every facet of a game, you can experience everything a game has to offer. But an MMO, for the most part, successfully completing it is not realistically achievable in that same 20-hour, 40-hour, 50-hour period. Even if you were to invest 100 hours, 200 hours into it, you're still not going to see what the end game players see. Now, reviewing it from a new player perspective and then reviewing it from an end game perspective are always going to alienate parts of their respective communities. It's disingenuous for a person to say that a game is something based off of just that surface level experience, as opposed to someone that invests thousands of hours into it. And you're never going to be capable of addressing everything everyone wants.
What we're known for as a genre, we had these widely different experiences, early game, mid game, into end game, and that's not true of like all of the time. In fact, one of the biggest examples that comes to mind that I believe that you're very familiar with, RuneScape, is like a game that I think had so much transferability with the casual audience, not just because of browser game, free, and all that other stuff that it had as value. It feels like you're playing the game from right away. And I feel like that's always something that people like about games like RuneScape, is that it doesn't feel like, okay, when I get 99 fishing, then I'm really going to start fishing. And it's like, no, okay, like I can start fishing now, and I can fish until I get to whatever, rank in fishing I want to get. My stance can probably be assumed to be that I kind of dislike how so many games have basically become glorified tutorials that then come into an actual game. I find the difficulty with that is that basically if you want to cover the game in its entirety, which is always what I'm interested in doing when I do a review, which I don't do very many of them for that reason, and they're not very profitable, which is another point, is like the amount of work and effort to get like destroyed over something that you're just like, you know what, I don't really know if everyone wants this as much as I think they do.
You eliminate a large portion of the game when you don't hit endgame, because raids, dungeons, PvP, that massive core feature of an MMO is always at endgame, or at least the best experience is always at endgame. I actually think that the way that MMOs are constructed are very clever because it prolongs their shelf life for each player. If you think of a single player game, let's take Dying Light, for example, right? It took 70 hours to 100% complete that game. And so many people were really angry about it because 70 hours is such an incredible amount of time. Well, not with MMO players. That's how they've always been. And that's why they're different to any other game that's out there, any other game media type that's out there. They've always been like this. They've always rewarded users for putting in hours and hours of their time into a game.
I think you can actually find some really important critiques as a very new player. And, it's funny. There's no better game to demonstrate this than Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 is kind of complicated for newer players, actually. This is one of the biggest complaints by new players. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the hell's going on. What am I supposed to do? I think you can similarly see that in other games. Like I think Final Fantasy is criticized for having a very slow starting out leveling experience, for example. World of Warcraft can be critiqued for having slightly confusing progression systems, particularly as you get towards the end game. I think these are actually really important. I think the reviewer does need to keep this in mind, that things might change, but I think it is actually important to say, yeah, the new player experience could use a little bit of work, right? That ain't so hot. It's in the interest of an MMO's community and fan base that these issues would be addressed, because then you're going to get more players, right? Then your community's bigger. Then your game company gets more money and you get more content.
I would say that what I've learned from that is don't do the video at 10 hours. Do it once you know you have some context, and especially that you have something positive to say. Even if you have 10 negative things to say, hold on to those. They are valid. And the veteran players need to understand that those are the things stopping that community from growing. So if you don't put those in there, you're never going to grow. Like because every new player is going to watch that video, they're going to try the game based on that video, and then because you didn't tell them about any of the bad things, they're going to go, it must just not be for me, because I must just be totally insane for running into these negatives. No, we all ran into them. We're just not talking about it. Go in there, find the compliment, open with that. So the veteran players understand, okay, he at least got to the good thing. And then you can say, my issue is that I had to go through these 5 things to get there.
And now we come to one of the strangest differences. Playing an MMO for fun can be completely different to playing it to analyse or critique. Many players have watched my videos and said, there's no way you played for 8 to 10 hours. You only got to that bit. I got there in 4 hours. And while it's probably true they did get there in 4 hours, the difference in progress lies in the fundamental way your gaming time can change when you're playing to evaluate and analyse instead of just your own enjoyment. Imagine the difference in speed reading a book simply to get through the story versus slowly analysing each paragraph for the themes and structure so you can write a report on it. One of them takes a lot longer. Now, you could always speed read the book and then try to write a report on it, but I promise you, you will forget the specifics or miss the hidden meanings. It's the same when playing to critique. When I play a game for content, I have a notepad and a pen, and I make extensive notes on every single thing in the game. I'll play for 5 minutes, write for 5 minutes. Play for 5 minutes, write for 5 minutes. I'll take notes on anything and everything, because I have to mine the experience to find the minutiae which makes entertaining content. Stopping to take notes, of course, staggers the flow of gameplay, but even without the note-taking, when playing to critique, you don't play in the most efficient way. It's not about speed running the quests or power leveling. You'll click every button in the menu. You'll equip every item. You'll talk to every NPC. If someone was watching you in the game, you'd look like you were lost because you'd be doing everything a completely fresh player would. For example, in my Rift video, I made a joke about how the opening area has an item in the shop called Mudder's Milk. This is a reference to the sci-fi TV show Firefly, but the only way I was able to make that 10-second throwaway joke and find that item was by talking to every single NPC and then opening every shop and reading every item name and description, which is something a veteran player of this game wouldn't do because they know this area is a pointless early game tutorial, and a new player wouldn't do it because you've not been encouraged to do that. As a reviewer, you're going to watch all of the in-game cutscenes, read all the subtitles, and then spend some time trying to boundary break because the scenery looks precarious. And it may end up being 20 wasted minutes just running at a wall, or it'll be the funny bit where you manage to find a gap in the floor and fly under the city. You'll complete the opening quests in slower ways because you don't know the optimal route yet, and if you get given boosting items in your inventory, you won't use them, because if you do, you'll completely break the narrative flow. Playing to critique isn't just enjoying the surface level experience and hoping you'll remember it all later, because you won't. It's playing suboptimally and interrogating the experience while making notes. This often means in a single hour of gameplay, you'll only actually advance 30 to 40 minutes worth into the game. This also means that if you did play for 100 hours as suggested earlier, it's not 100 hours of casually chilling on the sofa just playing the game, it's 100 hours of asking why to every experience and then cross-referencing it with every other MMO you've ever played so you can compare and contrast the experiences. While playing in a more analytical way changes your experience while gathering footage for YouTube or writing a script, live streaming an MMO on Twitch is also substantially different, but in another way. Live streaming an MMO to an audience is not playing the game efficiently, and it's definitely not stopping in silence to take notes every 5 minutes. It's using the game as background ambience while entertaining. Sometimes it's doing strange things in the game which are terrible gameplay, but great content. A streamer puts entertaining the audience first, and while high-level effective gameplay can be entertaining, such as watching a world first or a solo boss kill, those streams appeal to high-skilled, experienced players who understand the complexity of what they're watching, and they can appreciate the gameplay alone. If you're trying to entertain the majority of an MMO's player base, or even a broader gaming demographic using gameplay within an MMO, your gameplay will not be hyper efficient. It might be deliberately inefficient, silly, or deliberately annoying.
The way that I look at things is that generally I kind of do, like, I'll always try to break the game. It's like whenever the alpha for a new WoW expansion will come out, everybody will watch my stream, not to see me test out the new abilities, but to see what the new abilities can you go through that wall in Sunwell with this ability? Or, what happens if you use this at the top of Mount Hyjal and you fly down with it? Or with dragon riding or something like that. And fundamentally, whenever you're playing a game, if the game is fulfilling, if it's fun, if it's rewarding, that's really what matters the most. And I think that you see this a lot with different types of especially professional reviews, is that they will grade a game on criteria that is not valuable to what an average audience player would want. And I think that's a really big problem, honestly, because there's a massive disconnect between what the audience wants to see and what the audience cares about and what reviewers care about. So I try to play the game in a way that the review is going to reflect to a certain degree what an average player is going to experience. But that's also very hard to do because, you know, I've got a bunch of people playing with me. You know, I'll have people give me gold. And so whenever I'm playing a game, I have to contextualize all of that and say, like, well, listen, you know, this was not a big deal for me, but for an average person, it's like New World crafting. Yeah, I got furnishing to 200 in a day, but there are people that spent months on it and they still didn't get it to 200 because it fucking sucked. So I think it's important to take those things in consideration whenever you're reviewing a game. But the most important thing is to review a game in a way that's true to your audience. And I think that's one way that professional reviews have fallen short a lot recently.
But the different thing that I do is I try and interact with it like a totally regular player and look at it from a regular player's perspective. What does the player who's interacting with this at this point in the game where it becomes available, what do they know? Do they know enough things that this is properly tutorialized? Will they be able to do this? Does that content interact with them well? Does it work with a regular person's schedule? If you're a person that is logging on for 1 hour every day, does it work for that?
A lot of players, when they first jump in to play an MMO, their first goal is the end game, right? World of Warcraft, get to max level, do raiding and whatever. But as we've got like a limited time budget on this, we are trying to extensively review in the time frame that we've got. And doing so means we have to extensively evaluate the start of the game, which, as you said, is not something that a player would do. They will rush through to the end game. I find it quite hard to review MMOs in that way because I realize that it seems like a very odd review to a lot of people, but it also kind of works in our favor because there are things here that, like I say, players will never see, and other game reviews from the specialized channels, they may not even include any of that.
I think it's going to vary by content creator to content creator because me saying that I think I should always be playing for fun, even in the analysis, is that it comes through the natural discovery. Deeper dives are when the game then requires it of me. And so I get frustrated when I hear people say, oh, you're not efficient. I go, the game's not requiring me to be efficient. There's no pushback. There's no feedback mechanism that says I'm doing anything wrong.
I don't play any differently because I think I'm a critical person in general. Pretty much everything in my life I critique while I'm doing it. So I don't really play the games any differently. I just play it as if a normal person would play the game. And then if I miss something or whatever, I think most people would miss that. And if not, somebody's going to point it out and that's cool and everything. But I'm just going to play the game to try and enjoy it because I think that's the best way to do it in terms of like how the average person would experience it.
Playing for fun would be an MMO that's good enough for me to play in my spare time, not making content for it, just play the game with headphones in, with something on the second monitor, relaxing. You take a break from moaning about the game and just enjoy it for what it is. Playing to critique, you're analysing everything and vocalising your thoughts. Things that aren't a big deal when you're playing for fun or chilling become a bigger deal because your intentions are different. You're making a video to highlight problems with the game, with the hopes that the developers see the video, take your feedback, and improve the game.
I'm quite a slow player to begin with, unless it's something I've played 10 times already. I'm very much sort of person who likes to absorb the world and even like role play a little bit in some very mild ways, you know, do a bit of the old RP walking, that sort of thing. So I guess if I had a deadline, maybe I actually would be more efficient than how I normally play a game, because how I normally play a game is very much immersing myself deeply.
It's the same as when streaming. Because I don't know if you know about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that's launching in just a few days, but I love just kind of like becoming absorbed into them. If you're approaching it with the sole purpose of critiquing, criticizing, or praising specific aspects of it, you're sitting there like, okay, so this person is saying that isn't translated correctly, these textures don't fit. Okay, this combat's actually kind of slow and boring. Why do I need to kill 15 boars? You go from just having fun, experiencing something new, to immediately having to find fault with as many things as possible. And that is especially true when you realize that the majority of people that watch videos are purely because they want you to talk smack about everything that they don't like about the video game.
The difference between when I became like a career critic and so on and so forth and did QA work and QA testing, like it does kind of offer this different perspective where now fun for my individual sense and entitlement isn't the only thing that I'm searching for. So I find that it's a large part of like that concept is basically being able to divorce yourself from yourself and your personal enjoyment, but to be able to look at the game and say, okay, well, how does the game actually function on kind of like a base level outside of myself? So like, and to your point, I actually think that that's fairly true for me as well, but in a different way, where because I have a lot of history testing games, that is, to your point, you mentioned like trying to break a boundary. I actually spend so much time in early MMO experiences just trying to bug the game out and glitch. I actually feel kind of self-conscious about this, but I don't like streaming my gameplay as much when I have like impressions on something or when I'm forming my early thoughts for that reason, because I feel like people are so focused, and I know you probably experience this sometimes too, of telling me what to do. They'll do it religiously. They'll say, you need to go do this and you need to go do that. And I'm like, okay, guys, like, I've already said, please, like, understand that I am weird and I'm doing weird things, and sometimes I'll spend an hour just on my keybinds. Like, that's how I play and experience and do all the stuff that we're talking about, be critical.
You spend hours doing the minute little things that everyone else breezes over, hours making notes of the most minor things, because that's what a review is. Some people might take certain things for granted, like a wiggle of an icon or a circle on a mini map, because the average player doesn't really notice those things. But as a reviewer, it's your responsibility to point those out, to make a statement on it, and explain exactly what it is. You don't get to play an MMO the same way as the average person gets to play an MMO, which sounds bizarre, right? Because you're creating a review for the average MMO player or someone who's never played an MMO before. But your experience when you're playing an MMO for content is completely different. The average player can get through the World of Warcraft starting area in about 20 minutes if they play efficiently. But if you actually went and you critiqued every single experience within the tutorial zone of WoW, you would literally be there for 4.5 hours. I've done it. I know.
For sure, yeah, it definitely is a different mindset. I would say though that I think with reviews, what you'll find is that it's actually a combination of both of these things. It's not like, oh, the only stuff that goes into the review is my hardcore analysis. I think the analysis is important. You know, as a reviewer, you want to say, okay, how does this actually work? What is this system? How, you know, there's a cool reference there. I love the attention to detail here. So you are going to be analytical, because those are the things that can really, you can characterize a game. You can see the care and the love that the developers put into crafting this video game. So I think that analysis is super important. But I think in a review, you're also going to be talking about, yeah, I was playing the game and this happened and it was cool, right? I was doing this with my friends and it was really fun and we really loved that. That was an amazing, memorable experience. So I think that there is a different mode when you go into analysis critique mode, but there's always going to be, in my opinion, that underlying component of I played the game and it was fun.
Knowing that this is a game you're going to be playing for a video, I mean, I do the same thing, apart from I don't have a pen and paper. My handwriting's like a 5-year-old's. What I do, and what my goal is every time, is, again, it's kind of going back to the question beforehand, is I'm trying to play as if I was a player. The key word there is trying. So there is that issue of, you've got to go check everything out. You've got to see what the mechanics are. It's really important, because if you don't check the mechanics out, you know, you're just going to have like a very general experience and you don't have that much to review on. So, of course, you do have that push, but also at the same time, if I'm getting bored of something, if I find that this is tedious, I'm like, do you know what? I can't even really do anything with this as well. I might even just mention that in the video if it's quite bad. But you do have in the back of your head that you need to check everything out, compared to when you're playing, when you've just downloaded a game and you just want to play it for fun. You might not check everything out.
My wife makes fun of me because our most successful streams, some of my most successful videos, have all been when I'm doing something that would, by a typical gameplay experience, not be considered playing the game. I clicked on a sign in Final Fantasy XIV for 78 hours. We did it every Monday for like 2 months. We just clicked on a sign for 6 to 8 hours and then called it a day. And we did that. It was a total of 78 hours. And then there's a rare chance you get a house, and I got the house. And then it ended. And Brian asked me, I mean, these streams were literally 100 times more successful than anything else we'd done at the time. And Brian asked me offline, he goes, what's the worst thing that could happen on streaming right now? You know, like, could your microphone go bad? And I said, honestly, the worst thing that could happen is I get the house. Like the content is the not content. Like I'm wanting it, but like the worst thing that can happen is I get what I want. So we did a spreadsheet stream like 2 weeks ago, and I just did spreadsheets.
If you are sitting down to do something for work, even if it is work that you enjoy, you're going to have a little bit of a different mindset than when you sit down just to chill out and just to get the feel of things, get the vibe of things. You know, that's different. But maybe a little bit of both is good to do, you know, because obviously you need the analytical method. Like you said, checking every NPC and checking every little shop and all of that, checking every item. This helps you see what many players may have seen already, but you also need to have your own unique perspective, like your own natural and unique perspective that is the way that the game was designed to be enjoyed. It's like the difference between analyzing all of the ingredients that go into a meal and being a judge on Top Chef or something, and like thinking about the plating and the presentation and all that, and like and this difference between that and like sitting down at your friend's house to enjoy food that they cooked for you, right? Like these are two completely different mindsets, and I think that it might be good to experience both of them while you're looking at a game.
So why aren't there more MMO content creators? It's because it's an extremely niche section of the gaming world with a low audience cap, which not that many people have a deep passion about making content for. And critical opinions the creators need to have often put those creators at extreme risk of backlash from dangerously enfranchised fans. General MMO channels can cover more games and rely more on the personality of the content creator at the cost of missing the finer details of the games themselves. But specialized channels risk linking their channel's success and the creator's success to that chosen game's lifespan. It takes an extreme amount of time to play any single game to the point where making content on it is viable to the endgame players, and when you do make the content, you know it's got a predestined shelf life. So you're encouraged to make easier, more vapid content because it simply makes more sense considering time invested versus views gained, when you know the videos go obsolete so quickly. But that easy content is at odds with the design nature of MMOs to change the gameplay experience from patch to patch, from opening to ending, meaning you now need to make the choice between artistically fulfilling deep content destined to die or cheap, easy content destined to become useless. And you'll be doing all this while playing a very deep, demanding, time-intensive game in a draining, analytical way, taking notes as you do, and then trying to make your experience entertaining when the majority of your experience was probably quite repetitive. So what makes a good review? Well, it depends. Do you want a general overview with a detached, objective look at the opening of the game and then the mid-game? Or do you want a long-time specialist to look at the end game? Because both reviews are completely valid and both are extremely different. The takeaway seems to be that we as content creators and you as audience members need to have realistic expectations of the other, who the specific video is aimed at, and to be honest about the level of depth you can expect from our content, given the balance we need to find between quality and quantity. If you don't put out quality videos, people won't like your channel, and if you don't put out quantity, you won't make a living on YouTube. If you've watched this whole video and you're still thinking that you want to make MMORPG content, then good. We want you to. This video wasn't designed to scare you away, it was designed to welcome you into a strange career with a bit of look at the truth behind what you're actually going to experience. If you're a passionate MMORPG player, make MMORPG content. We need you. I need you. There's only so many crap games left until I have to play World of Warcraft. A huge shout out to all the fantastic creators who keep creating amazing MMORPG content and for freely giving me their time to make this video possible. All of their channels are linked in the description below. Another massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep this channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, have a great day.